learn. Baha'u'llah doesn't say that. He says, no man shall ever attain the ocean of the knowledge of understanding, of the ocean of understanding, the shores of the ocean of understanding, unless he be detached from all that is in heaven and on earth. You see the condition he has put down for it? And detachment, we talked about it this morning, what it means. If you are in love with Baha'u'llah, your heart will become opened, and then anything you want to know is there. Believe it. Believe me, I've seen the early believers who were illiterates. And this is the history of our faith. And their understanding of the faith was so deep. It gushes out of their heart. You have seen two types of learned people, if you like to call it. One who had knowledge, oh yes, great learned men, and they come along and give talks to you and discuss a lot of things and theories and all sorts of ideas and books and writers and everything you like. And then there is a man who may be illiterate, who has got this great understanding of the faith. Now, the other man may not have understood the faith. He has the knowledge of the faith, but he have not necessarily understood the faith. And this is why some of them leave the faith after becoming scholars. We have had so many scholars who have left the faith because he doesn't understand the faith. To understand the faith, we have to really go closer to Baha'u'llah. To the extent that you go nearer to him and closer to him, and this means you become detached, then your heart becomes the dawning place of the knowledge of God. Somebody came to me a few years ago and he said that I have been a Bahai for 10 years and I have read many things. I have accepted everything Baha'u'llah has said, but he said one thing I cannot accept, and he told me one of the writings of Baha'u'llah. He said I can never accept that. And he said I've asked many people to explain to me the wisdom of this, but nobody has been able to explain it to me. Can you tell me what is the wisdom of this? Because he said I can never accept that. Well, here it is now, a problem. I said to him, have you ever thought you might be wrong? He said, no, really not. Now, you know, we have to be humble here. If you want to approach the cause, the revelation of God, you have to be humble. And I said, well, not until you are ready to accept that you may be wrong. And I said, now, of course, you believe in this. You can't say you are wrong, but at least you must be prepared to say that you are wrong. You may be wrong. You cannot understand this. You will never understand this. This, you are a believer. You believe in Baha'u'llah. There is no question about it. You know He's a manifestation of God, and you know that man makes a mistake. Well, the only thing to do is to submit and say, I don't understand this. I may be wrong. I am wrong. I accept. Without recognizing it, without knowing it, you accept it. And do you know what happens? Once you accept it and you submit yourself, then one day, it may be tomorrow, it may be the next month, it may be the 10 years from now, suddenly it will flash into your mind and into your heart the wisdom of that thing. And nobody can explain it to you, but it will come to you when you read the writings. Suddenly it will penetrate into your heart like an electric bolt. And then you know the wisdom of it. But not until you submit. As long as you say, oh no, I don't accept that, it will never come. So you see, friends, studying and deepening in the faith is a spiritual experience. We have to aim for that, so that our hearts become the repository of the knowledge of God. And so, as I said, I have seen many people who were illiterates, who did not have or did not have much of a knowledge, but who had such an understanding of the faith. Every time you ask them a question, even if they had never heard of that question, never heard of it in the writings, never knew what the answer was, the answer would come, and when you look into the writings, you could see this is exactly what Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha have said. This is a true deepening. And I feel we should aim for this more and more, all of us. Do not become do not feel inferior to all these people who come to you. And I'm not in any way trying to value the value of people who are learned or who have knowledge. But don't be frightened of them. Really. You have Baha'u'llah, and he will come and teach you a lot of things that these people themselves don't know it. You may come across people who go to universities years after years, and I'm not in any way saying it's bad to go to universities, but they come and they talk to you about the faith, and you might be feeling inferior. Don't feel inferior. The faith is for all of us. Baha'u'llah is for everybody, the humblest person. And it is you who can know much more than he does. But of course, how wonderful it would be if knowledge and understanding are together. Oh, this is beautiful now. And this is this is like the chandeliers, which is perfect in itself. Crystal, lovely, beautiful, exquisite lamp. But it is also lighted, you see. A person who has knowledge and understanding, has ilm and irfan, means knowledge and understanding. This is perfect. It's like Mirza Abul Fazl, the great Bahai scholar we have. He had both knowledge and understanding. And this is, of course, the aim. We must learn knowledge, we must acquire knowledge, but we must also turn to Baha'u'llah so that in humility, so that he may give us this gift of understanding. Well, now that we have talked about this, let me now enter into another subject. I hope I'm not making you tired, huh? Soon we will have a break, don't worry. Whenever the chairman walks down the steps, we know the time has come. I think that the other thing I wanted to bring up the subject is, you remember we said there are two major work we have to do. One is that of teaching the cause, which is the most important thing which we have been talking about up to now. The other thing is the building of the institutions of the faith. The institutions of the faith, which we are building now, the local assemblies and the national assemblies, these are the instruments for the future of mankind, the institutions for the future of mankind. We may not realize this yet ourselves, because we are so much in the early days of the faith, and these institutions are so weak that we may not ever think probably that, this local spiritual assembly one day is going to become the house of justice for this town. A house of justice, who knows? Maybe it will become something like the government of the house, of this town. But whatever it is, hello, beautiful little boy, very nice. These local spiritual assemblies one day become houses of justice for mankind, for the people of this town. And we may not realize this, but at this moment that we are talking about, we are entering into a very critical age, critical time in the history of mankind. A time which we talked about again this morning is filled with perils and with dangers and with sufferings, with tribulations, calamities. And the only thing which mankind will have when the world is really has tasted the agony of this whole calamities which has to come, are these institutions we are building. There is nothing else which will be left, which mankind can really have turned to, which would save it. And even now as we stand here, if it wasn't for the institutions of the faith, for the new life which Baha'u'llah has breathed into the world of man, the world would not be together. The world is keeping together today because of the existence of these institutions. It's because of the house of justice that the world is now exists the way it is and can exist. It's because of our institutions of local and national assemblies that our communities can exist. Really. And it is the only refuge, Shoghi Effendi mentions, of a tottering civilization. And we must believe in these things. We are not building these assemblies for fun. There's no fun in that. And we are not working, we are not serving on these local assemblies for fun either. Because it's a difficult job to really really go into the local assemblies and to act as in the way we should. It's a very difficult job. Needs a lot of perseverance and labor. So you see, not until we realize the significance of these institutions. Now, I have used this example before, and I'm going to use it again. It's not a bad example, perhaps. Some of you may have heard this. And that is an example from nature of what we have been going through, what we will be going through. I'm going to use an example of nature. In nature, if you look at an egg is a perfect food for you until it is fertilized and a new life begins to grow in that egg. Once the egg is fertilized and the chicken begins to grow in that egg, the food becomes corrupt, becomes rotten. You can't eat it anymore, and the balance is gone inside. A new situation has arisen in that egg, within that egg. And what happens is this, that this little life begins to grow inside, surrounded by all this rotten material. And this rotten material becomes its food. And as the more this chicken grows inside the egg, the more rotten becomes the egg. These two are very related together. Until such time that these two can never again, the situation cannot last. The balance is gone. And then there would be an explosion. The egg breaks. And then a new life appears. It's born. And what has happened to the egg and all the things in it, it's all gone. The only thing which is left behind is a broken shell. You see, this is law of life. And once the egg is fertilized, nobody can stop that process. Nobody can say, all right, now it has been fertilized and the chicken is beginning to grow, but we can stop it. You can't. Once this process starts, nobody can stop it. The same principle, it's not an example, it's a principle of life. You remember yesterday I was saying how nature teaches us a lot of things and we can learn a lot of things. One of the lessons is this thing, is this story of the egg. Now, exactly the same thing has happened with the coming of Baha'u'llah. When he came, he fertilized the egg of human society when he declared his mission. And from that moment onwards, the seed of the Bahai community was planted. See? And from that time, from that moment onwards, the world began to deteriorate in its conditions, and they became unstable. And the corruption set in. And the destruction set in. But it is gradual. At first nobody could feel it. First nobody will feel it. At first when the chicken is just, when the egg is fertilized, you wouldn't see any difference. But gradually, but the process has begun. And as time goes on, as the faith grows, as the institutions of the faith grow, as the Bahai community grows, along with it, the world conditions will deteriorate. And the Bahai community, like this little chicken, is surrounded by this corrupt world. We are surrounded by it and we are immersing in it and we are swimming inside it. But there is a distinction between the two. And then this condition cannot last very long. Baha'u'llah says suddenly that will happen which will cause the limbs of mankind to quake. Time comes that this egg has to open up. And once it opens up, what is safe and sound and the only thing which really is worth talking about is the birth of the institutions of the faith. It will be born. People can see it. Now it does not mean that when this happens that the faith can run the world for us. Oh no. When a child is born, it cannot do anything. It cannot run around, it cannot rule the town, it cannot do anything. It has to be years to grow, to nourish, to be nourished, to grow, to then in the future when it grows up, it can take over all the things. And it's the same thing with the faith. the institutions of the faith. When this happens, when this egg breaks up, when the world situation comes to a head, and that which Baha'u'llah says, referring to it as the limbs of mankind quaking, and Shoghi Effendi calls it the calamities. When that happens, all that will happen is that the institutions of the faith will show themselves to the world. They will emerge. It's like a mother who is pregnant. Nobody can see the child. You go outside into the world and talk to the people about the institutions of the faith, what we are building, local assemblies, they are the foundations of the future society. They think you are a little bit, well, they don't understand this. But not until that child is born, not until it's born can people see, and then they realize what we are talking about. Now it is this that Baha'u'llah talks about it, when he says, then and only then will the divine standards be unfurled, after this calamity, after the suffering. He says, then and only then mankind can see. Then and only then they can see what these institutions that we are building are doing for mankind. And it is then that they'll turn to us in great numbers. Shoghi Effendi says these local assemblies must act and will act as beacons of light at the time of greatest peril. When the ship is drowning, the best thing for it is a beacon of light. And so we have to have these beacons of light now, preparing for a time that when the time comes that these beacons will be shining. To be switched on, not switched off. So you see the significance of these institutions that we are building, and how important it is that we should build more institutions. I don't know how it is in this country, but I can tell you in some countries that I am familiar with, for instance in Ireland, again I must constantly talk about Ireland, I live there anyhow. If there are 10 Baha'is in a town, we call it luxury. 9 is enough. We have to build up institutions of the faith. And one of them is going to say, now they're going to look at each other and say, these 10, and say, which one of us is going to be? But one of them will go. We really have very few local assemblies, which is more than 9. There are 2 or 3, and they're usually the capitals, or usually some people have the excuse, and they're right. Their husband is non-Bahai, the wife is non-Bahai. I was told by the chairman of the National Assembly there that 90% of the Baha'is of Ireland have once in their life at least pioneered, and some several times, to these local communities. 90%. Now I don't know how many people you are in here, but I think you could make quite a few assemblies. And it all need not go long distances. You can go 10 miles out of your town and form an assembly, form a community there. These institutions, the more we have them, the more beacons of light for mankind. And this is why the House of Justice wants us to increase these institutions. And we will make more institutions. So you see the significance of the local spiritual assemblies. I wonder if we should close in 5 or 10 minutes, 3:15, is it all right, Mr. Chairman? Right. Now I'm going to tell you, we are talking about local spiritual assemblies now, and I know what the local spiritual assemblies are, some of them that I am familiar with. Again, I don't know what you people are like, what your assemblies are like. Maybe you are perfect. But some local assemblies are not perfect. And the friends feel, oh well, a local assembly is very weak. They become disheartened. For instance, there may be a local assembly that there are 9 people, but only 6 of them are really coming regularly. Oh, the other, and this is very disheartening. And they say, well, what's the use of this? What can we do about this? And then they tell them to make more of these. This is the problem. This is the problem. You see, you have got this weak local assembly, and they tell you to make more of them. Now, I will talk about this after this session, a little bit about this. But let me give you a story of a weak local assembly, because you may have never seen a weak local assembly. I will explain to you what it is like, just to give you an example of it. And then we close. And then when we come back, I want to describe the real significance of these institutions. I'll give you a story, because I have been once, years ago, we had a local spiritual assembly in Dublin. Now that must be about 30 years ago. And in those days the faith was in its early stages, very, very early. Our famous Mr. Townsend, he was a member of the assembly, I was a member of the assembly, and then we had some others. I'll just give you an idea of what our assembly was like. You might be maybe amused by it. Well, now, and I am saying these things very bravely, because all these people who were members of this assembly, they're all gone to the next world. They're not going to hear me. They're not going to hear me. And if they hear me, they can't. You remember yesterday I was saying how the souls in the next life cannot influence us in a bad way? They can't be angry at me. On the contrary, they're going to shower their blessing upon us. Yes, they're all gone. Most of them are gone. Now, you remember we had this assembly, and then we had, there were some Persian believers in it who knew not one word of English. They had come out from Persia, and they had not been familiar to any of these standards in the Western world. It was so strange to them. They did not know one word of English. And they were insisting that anything which is said in the local assembly, they must know what it was. And I had to translate it for them, every word. Now they would say, it's no use just to tell us the gist of it or the briefly, but you have to tell us word by word so that we can understand this man when he's talking. That's a difficult job, And if I ever wouldn't do it, they would quote verse and chapter for me that you must do it, So this was one of the things we had to have. Then we had a lady who was suffering from Parkinson's disease. And whenever she came to the meetings, we had to be very quiet, and she was shaking, and we often had to make her lie down. You see? And then we had a gentleman who was stone deaf, wouldn't hear a thing. And I remember my job was to, first of all, when the discussions began, I had to translate it into English, into Persian for the friends. And then I had to always sit beside our beautiful, wonderful Mr. Jones, who was deaf, and shout into his ears what we have been saying, you see? Now imagine, this is an institution which is going to govern the whole of mankind in the future. Now how can we, if we lose the vision of it, then you will deteriorate into a very low condition. But you must always keep the vision that this is the source of God's kingdom on earth, you see. And Mr. Jones, I had to shout at him all the time. And the minute you shouted, Doris would say, "Oh, why do you shout so much?" I remember one day we were sitting there and we were discussing subject, and somebody made a suggestion saying, when we hold these public meetings in these hotels, we used to have a public meeting in a hotel. He said, well, let us give a cup of tea to everybody. It's nice. At the end of the meeting, we'll give them a cup of tea. So I translated this for our friends. They say to give a cup of tea. They said, fine, we agree with this. Then I turned to our friend. They say that in the hotel you should give them a cup of tea every time that the friends come. He said, I've had a cup of tea at home, not now. You see? So I said, no, not in here, not in here. Oh, he said, you're not giving us a cup of tea every time you did. So having finished this, I said, no, Mr. Jones agrees. We should have a cup of tea. To the Persians. Oh, no, but he said, you have been talking to him a long time. You must tell us what he was saying. All the details of it we want to hear. You were talking to him for a long time. Now, friends, this is the basis of our institutions. This is how our institutions are functioning. You see the weakness now? You could look, if you look at it from the outside world, it is very funny and it is very insignificant. But you know, these institutions now have given birth, have matured, have given birth to a national assembly in that country. We have a national assembly. We have now 30 local assemblies, both in the north and the south of Ireland. Now the conditions have changed enormously. But in those days, it was the weakness of the institutions, was part of the growth of the institutions. Because the faith has an organic growth. It doesn't grow up like a machine. You don't mold it into a shape and say, there it is. It's an organic. And when you first put the seed down into the ground, you go and see that seed. You go and unearth it. Just open up the earth and see what has happened to the seed. It's rotten. It rots under the ground. And when you look at it, you say, oh, this rotten. What is it going to do? But it has life. And it will grow. And it will produce a tree. And I think this is the way we should look upon our institutions. And then all these weaknesses will be overlooked. Friends, let us go and have what are we going to do, Mr. Chairman? We will probably have a photograph, or I would love to have a photograph, yes. It would be beautiful to remind us. If you, are you really tired, do you think, you people? No? If you are, you can lie down. You are already eating, some of you, I can see. You might just as well. Yes, well, let some others come in now. They are coming in. Encouraging to look at you all eating and drinking. It's a great thing to look at it, you know. And all I've got in here is a little bit of old water. Well, friends, we were in the previous session we were talking about the weakness of our institutions today, and how this weakness often clouds the issue for us of the greatness of the institutions of the faith. We think, oh well, we may look upon it as a weak institution, and therefore we will not be able to appreciate the power and the glory and the greatness with which these are invested. Now, I wanted to go a little further here and talk about this a little bit more, because it's very important that we understand the nature of our institutions. The nature of our institutions are embryonic. We are dealing with embryonic institutions of the faith. They are not the institutions which are now able to govern mankind. They are embryonic, in the same way that the child in the womb of the mother has life, but it cannot do anything at this stage. It has a great future. These institutions of the local spiritual assemblies become houses of justice in the future. But now they can't become houses of justice. Now, in order to explain this point, I would like to draw your attention to the institutions of the outside world. The institutions which you will find mankind has built up for itself. There are many institutions, religious institutions, there are political institutions, social institutions, all over the world. But these institutions are all man-made, and there is no life in them. No life, really. You look at any of these old world institutions, there is no life. They work like machines. Machines have no life. If you look at a machine, it has no life. But for a machine to work, all parts of that machine must work in perfection. Isn't that right? If you're having a machine, you cannot have a machine which it will not work unless everything is perfect. This is a fact. We know this. One little thing goes wrong in that machine, the whole thing will stop. So the emphasis is on perfection. But there is no life in it. Now you compare that machine with a child of 3 years of age and see the difference. Our institutions are like that child. You compare the outside institutions, which are like machines, and they have to work in perfection. Every part has to work in perfection. Now you compare that with a child of 2 or 3 years of age. You will find the child has no perfection. You see the difference now? It has no perfection, but it has life. And it has the promise of the future. This is the difference. Our institutions are like this. They are in the state of infancy. They are not perfect. They make a lot of mistakes, both local and national institutions of the faith. But they have life in them, and they have the promise of the future. You know, when you have a child which is very young and he comes into the room, we have none of them in here, by the way. We have got some beautiful children sitting who are much grown up, but I mean smaller than these children. If they come into the room, they are going to disturb a lot of things. They could disturb a lot of things. A small child could pull things up and break up things and draw lines on the walls for you and all kinds of things they do. But the parents are not worried about this. Why is it that the parents are not worried about all the imperfections of their child and all the wrong things he does? Because they know in the future he's not going to do it. That's all. They know when he grows up he's not going to do it. That's not why they're not worried about it. This is exactly the way we are. This is exactly the way the House of Justice is dealing with the local and the national spiritual assemblies of today. And the same way the Guardian did before them. They are not worried about all the mistakes we make at all. And you know, we make a lot of mistakes in our institutions because they are not infallible. I was talking to somebody in the House of Justice, a member of the House of Justice, and he was telling me, he said, nearly we come across maybe with 20 or 30 mistakes that the National Assembly has done, some very serious mistakes. But we don't bring it to their notice. We let them grow out of it. They have to grow out of it. Maybe if there is one of them out of this 20 or 30, which is fundamental point, we will bring up to their notice. You will be surprised to hear how many mistakes and wrong things and wrong attitudes that we have in our institutions, which are overlooked completely. They are not brought us to our attention. In the same way that a father or a mother would not and cannot, in fact, expect his child to act like a mature person. Can you do that? Can you ever do your child to behave like a grown-up person? If you do it, you're going to destroy him. But you must let him make all the mistakes and pull all the things together and push all the things down and break things up. And he grows and grows out of it himself. If everything that he does which is wrong, really it's by our standards, by the adult standards, everything that he does really in the house is wrong. Now if we try to correct him, punish him right, left and center, the minute he does a move, you just change it, he's going to become a nervous wreck. He will not grow. Whereas you have to let it do all these things and it will grow out of it. But if he does something fundamentally wrong, oh yes, if he's going to burn his finger, you just pull him back. But other than that, you will put up with all the wrong and the difficulties that happens in the home with the child, because you know in the future he's not going to do it. This is exactly what the House of Justice today is doing to us. They know we make all the mistakes and all the weaknesses we have. Oh, so many things. And yet, they don't draw to our attention. So you see, the faith has an organic growth. The institutions of the faith have an organic growth. And so our job at this time, when we look upon our local spiritual assemblies, is to love them and to cherish them, in spite of all these weaknesses that they have, in the same way that the parents love and cherish their children. in spite of all the wrong little things that they do. And not until we acquire this consciousness and recognize that these institutions belong to Baha'u'llah, that they have the future. Their future is great. In the future they are not going to make these mistakes. And if they ever did, they will be held responsible by other institutions, by higher institutions. But you can't hold responsible a child for a lot of wrong things he is doing. You see, you give a nice suit of clothes to a child and you let him out into the garden, he comes back rolled in mud. You can't keep him responsible. You don't blame him. That's a child. But when an adult, if you give him to an adult, a 21-year-old man goes out and rolls in mud, he's in trouble. He has to answer for it. But that time has not yet come. And so we are to deal with our institutions with the greatest love. We have to cherish them, we have to obey them, yes. And even they make wrong decisions. Abdul Baha has said that you obey them and the right things will come out. And I have seen this happening over and over again. And sometimes it may be very difficult for us to obey them because we know they have made a wrong mistake, wrong decision in your heart of hearts. But we don't criticize them. It is forbidden to criticize the actions of the local spiritual assembly publicly. Oh, you can criticize them. The only way you can criticize these institutions is to write to them. If you have a criticism of any local assembly, you write to that local assembly and openly tell them what you think of it. Now, it is the duty of the local assembly then to pay attention to it and give you an answer and discuss it. Now, if you are not satisfied with their answer, you don't disobey them. You still obey them. But you write, but this time you turn to the National Assembly. And even if you don't like the decision of the National Assembly, you still obey them. But then you can turn to the House of Justice and say, well, I don't agree with this. But you see, we have all the freedom of criticizing. But once you did that, once you wrote a letter, and or you went and saw them personally, that's finished. The minute you talk it over with a 10th person, with another person, then that is a serious breaking of one of the very sacred laws of the faith. You can't go on and criticize a local assembly by writing to them your views and then going out into the public and constantly saying, oh, you know, I think this assembly is doing this and this assembly is going to do that. This is against the faith. And the same thing is with the National Assembly. If you find that you are not happy with what the National Assembly does, you can criticize them in writing, but we cannot go out and criticize them in front of each other. But we have to obey them. But I know these things don't happen in here, probably. I'm sure of this. But I think that what we have to do, and this is a very vital thing, is that we have to cherish them and love them. Your National Assembly, for example, is a body that all the believers must rally around. You must pray for them. You must help them in your prayers, in your thoughts. And we must obey them, obey that institution, because it belongs to Baha'u'llah. It's the institution of Baha'u'llah's institutions. And we must never allow that institutions to be humiliated by any outside body or force. Well, I'm lost here. I don't know where to turn and what to say because time is limiting us. I think this conference is finishing, as far as I can see it, today in a sense, because so many of you are going to go. And
could you say a word about meditation and possibly distinguish from study?
Well, I'll make a note of it in here because there are so many points that the friends have asked in here, and I maybe talk about all of these things. I feel that the best thing for me would be, maybe now, to turn to your questions and see whether we can at least end up this. And if those of you who come tomorrow, we could all together begin with a different subject. So let us perhaps see what we have here now and try to deal with some of the questions. Is that acceptable to you? Now, what I have said so far about teaching and this afternoon, if you have any questions that you even want to ask now, I can make a note of them in here and then we'll see how we can fit them in. Anybody else has any questions? Yes?
I don't know if this would be feasible, but I wonder if tomorrow, when it'll be kind of a new situation, if you couldn't give us the people that...
Well, maybe. I'll make it. We'll see. We will see. Yes?
I'd like to be able to understand better how those of us, all of us that possess an ego and utilize that ego, how with the ego we fight the ego.
Oh. Yeah. I feel that, yes, there's another question in here. I think this question of ego, you were here when I was telling you the story of the drop on the ocean? Oh. This is why. Yes. You see, the story of the drop on the ocean is this. I'll repeat it for you. This is a story of a little drop of rain, they say, was falling down from sky, from the clouds. And it was very proud of itself because it realized that it was the water of life. And water of life is very, very precious. It's the most precious thing in this creation. And so that drop of rain was very proud of itself as it was coming down, until it suddenly saw the ocean beneath it. And when it saw the ocean, it saw its own insignificance, and it shouted and it said, if this exists, then what am I? Up to then he hadn't seen the ocean, you see. And when it said this, the ocean attracted it to itself and made it part of the ocean, became a part of the ocean. Now this story is very apt in here. We are all like that drop of rain, and the self is that call, is that voice within us, which you call it ego, which is proud of itself. Not until we see the greatness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah that I was talking about yesterday again. And that is a very important key. Not until we see that. Now again, if you were not here yesterday, maybe sometime you can refer to some of these tapes. We talked about this. Or those of you who will be tomorrow, maybe I can read for you some passages which you can see what a tremendous revelation this is. Not until you see that great ocean and recognize it, we will not become humble. Humility, true humility really comes then when you see yourself as utter nothingness. Then the self will go into the background. Yes?
Well, yeah, I only brought it up as something that maybe we can go into tomorrow.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, I think this is the answer I have. We must, not until we recognize the greatness of this revelation and turn to Him, we turn to Him with a feeling of awe and wonder, can we recognize our own impotence. And then the self will disappear, or will not completely. We cannot destroy the self. We must not destroy the ego. The ego is there. You cannot destroy it as long as we live here. I was mentioning, well, I don't think we better go into that now. Take us further and further. Any other questions that you have? Very good. Yes, please. Shout about it.
How many tablets of Ahmad is there? And
what's this? How many what?
Tablets of Ahmad.
How many?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And also in the tablets of Ahmad, where it says, "Be as a flame of fire to my enemies, and a river of life to my beloved."
Well, you said how many tablets of Ahmad there are, isn't it? Isn't it the first question, isn't it? Yeah. Well, there are several tablets which are written for people called Ahmad, but they were different people. You see now? There is one particular which is very famous. That's what you say. There is another one which is also famous, and Shoghi Effendi has translated parts of it in the gleanings, parts of it. Although his name does not appear as Ahmad in that particular part, but that's another tablet. And there are other tablets which are written for other people called Ahmad. So it's not easy to say how many tablets of Ahmad there are. There may be several, depending on the number of people whom Baha'u'llah had written to different Ahmads. Ahmad is a very common name. But there are two which are very famous and well known amongst the believers. One is the one we always read and call it the Tablet of Ahmad, and most believers are familiar with it. The other one is an Ahmad who was very different type of a person altogether than the other one. One was the embodiment of purity and sanctity, and the other one was the opposite. And Baha'u'llah wrote to both of them. The one that we read, of course, is that Ahmad who really was so detached from the things of this world that Baha'u'llah has given him such a great station. Now, when you say that Baha'u'llah has said that be as a flame of fire to my enemies and a river of life eternal to my loved ones, well, it is not necessarily meaning that when you see the enemies you have to burn them up and destroy them. This is not what is meant. It's really meant, you see, a fire always in the writings. A fire is an instrument by which you can tear up and burn the veils which come between man and God. In the long obligatory prayer you can say, make my prayer a fire that can burn away the barriers between me and God. So that when Baha'u'llah says that you should be as a flame of fire to my enemies, in one sense, you could say it means that you should burn their veils of ignorance. Fire also warms up the hearts of people, That's another thing, to warm them up. So that there are various tablets of Baha'u'llah in which he has in fact used these symbols very clearly. He has said, in some tablets, for example, Baha'u'llah says to a person, he says, be as a flame of fire, and with it warm up the hearts of people. So from these words you can deduce that it's not meant that you should become fierce with people. In fact, in one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah has made it very clear that we should never interpret anything in his writings into that state of fierceness and rising up against other people. He has mentioned that, and I think quoted it in his third volume of the Revelation of Baha'u'llah when we are describing the fire tablet. Baha'u'llah says, do not use those passages which I have used in the fire tablet as a pretext to rise up and to destroy people's lives or otherwise to become an aggressive person. He says, these passages we have revealed in order to indicate the sufferings which have been inflicted upon him. And that he says in this dispensation, we must be always loving people, even our enemies. This is the teachings of God, and it will never be changed. It is the eternal teaching of God. If that was what was in your mind, perhaps this may be the answer to it. All right? Yes?
I have a crucial question.
A crucial question we can't answer.
To myself. The tablet of Ahmad and the fire tablet, are those to be, this is in relation to prayer on the one hand and reading the writings on the other. Are those, if you say those are reading the writings or praying,
we cannot really here draw, there is nothing hard and, there is nothing absolutely hard and fast rule that you can say this is one and that's the other. There are many prayers which are like tablets. There are many tablets which are like prayers, half of them. So that we, again, remember, everything depends on your intentions and your heart. I can assure you that if every morning you read the prayers and thinking these are the writings, that will be acceptable to God. Of course it will be. God is very, very forgiving. And He looks at your motives more than anything else. But I think this, you can't draw a line between it, and I think that both of them are correct.
In the volume here, 3, I've given about the parsons and all that. There's similar names, something like Bull Durham tobacco. Both of them start with a D, and I think the two backwards on the right-hand side are slightly different. Laws, tablets or laws. But anyway, what is the expression? The two would be one or the other would mean.
I didn't exactly follow what you were saying. Sorry. Anything else? Yes?
You mentioned somewhere along the line that there were some things that are counter to creation, or
That what?
that run counter to the creative force of God. You might say unforgivable.
Oh.
That keep our souls from progress.
Well, no. All I said was that one of them is what Christ refers to it is sin against the Holy Ghost, which is to us Baha'is is the covenant breaking. Now that you mentioned that, I think it's not a bad idea if I talk to you a little bit about the covenant. Huh? Yes. You see, I mentioned yesterday a little bit about this, and now before I go there, I want to put your mind at ease. Somebody has written me a letter here called Carlos. I don't know who it is. Carlos, you are the one. Now, I wonder whether we should discuss this thing with you later on, because it's all about the obligatory prayer, isn't it? And if there is time, by all means, we can discuss it. But it's something that you and I can talk about it. Asking some meanings of this and that. And the other person is called McGrath. It's you. Now, will you be here tomorrow? Will you be here tomorrow? Okay. Well, I'm just saying, in case we couldn't deal with it today, at least we can leave it. And there is another person. And there is another person who has written, his name is Thank You. Now, and this is about process of the lesser peace. Now, I'm just wondering whether that person will be here tomorrow.
No, but I can take it. It's my wife.
Oh. You will be here tomorrow? Huh?
Yes.
You will be? Oh, good. Well, then I like always to put the questions away. And that's how we did it. Right, successfully. Now we can talk. Oh, you are coming, yes?
Yes. Danya.
Yes? Yeah, what is the part?
It says here the tablet of the world.
Yes.
But you recognize a similar expression in a different tablet.
No.
Okay, well, forget that. I mean, the expression is, in the index, you fail to translate the Jaliyat.
Oh. I didn't translate it, no? Well, that's my problem. Fault. Effulgences. I'm glad I'm not infallible, you know. We make a lot of mistakes. That's a great relief, actually, when you know that you are not infallible. I find it very good. And it's a great relief. And that's one of the bounties of God, really, that He has made us not infallible. And that we make all these. Well, friends, I think it's not a bad idea if we talk about the covenant. But before I talk about the covenant, there's one subject that maybe we can talk about it now, and that is to close the materials that we have been discussing so far about reading, saying the prayers, reading the writings, teaching the faith, and we said how important it is, and as we go do these things, our faith will grow. And I mentioned that we must not become rigid in anything in life. We should not become rigid. These are the basic principles that we have to observe. But you know, if you didn't today, you will do it tomorrow. Don't be worried about it. Although tomorrow may never come, that's another thing. But and don't keep me responsible now and said that you told us not to do it today. And but all I'm saying is this, that we must become very much assured of God's bounties which will come to us if we take a little step towards teaching and towards reading. God will help us enormously. And I mentioned that you could examine, you could test these things. You could test Baha'u'llah and see how much he will change our lives. I've heard many friends have come to us and told us the same thing, that since they have been putting these things into practice, that they have been reading the writings religiously. I told you like the story of the Irish girl I mentioned to you yesterday in Paris. Do you remember? Now, these people are so much out of the problems of this world. All the problems are no longer on their shoulders. They just feel a new person. They feel relieved of all things because their reliance is on Baha'u'llah. Although they may go through a great deal of suffering, but they know that this is a marvelous thing, and they endure it, and they love it, and they grow in the faith. So that all these points that I mentioned yesterday, the reading of the writings, the saying of the obligatory prayers, the living of the life, the teaching the cause, and the pioneering and making more local assemblies, really, these are the basic works which will help us to grow, and our faith will grow. But then there are dangers. Now I'm going to mention some dangers for you here. Dangers. You know, if you possess a very nice thing, there are thieves who are ready to take it from you. If you have a beautiful treasure, there are thieves. There are some very dangerous robbers, highway robbers, who can rob it of you. Now that I'm talking of highway robbers, I remembered of a story which might be a good thing to hear it. Highway robbering. Do you know what highway robbering is? You have never been involved in it. Highway robbering is something which happened in the East very much. And when I was young, we used to go through it all the time. When you travel from one town to another, there are big deserts around. And these deserts, there are certain areas that armed men are there, bandits you call them, and they attack caravans and people who are traveling, and they will take all their things from them, everything they have. I think you had them in America years ago. You've forgotten the practice, huh? Nowadays you don't do this, but in the old days they used to do that. Now, in these highway robbers, there was a highway robber who somebody talked to him about the faith, and this is not a made-up story, really. And he became a Bahai. But in those days, there were no local assemblies to help us. He just taught him the faith. He accepted Baha'u'llah and became a believer. But he continued in his work as a highway robber, you know. He was really sincerely, he was doing his job very well. He understood certain teachings, of course, and he also heard that in the faith there was no clergy, there were no priests. You know, this is one thing he heard. There was no priests in the faith. And he was very happy about that there were no priests, because after a year, when he met this Bahai and he told him, "How are you doing?" He said, he said, "My business is going on very well. In fact, it's much better than last year." Because he said, when I was a Muslim, I would never rob a clergyman, but now I do. Now this man later on really became a true Bahai, and then he lived the life completely different, I can tell you that. We all change, you know. Yes, we were talking about highway robbers who robs you of everything. Now in the faith also, in our lives, there are very dangerous robbers for every one of us in our lives, which we have to be very careful. Once you become a Bahai, and once you grow in the faith, and once you do all these things we mentioned, you have to be constantly watching. And it's a constant watching, in the same way that you, I don't know what you do here, but in our countries we have burglar alarms and all kinds of things to protect us from this. Now there are I'm going to mention three very dangerous robbers of faith, who rob our faith away from us. The first one who robs it, and is the very dangerous one, is our own self. Again, an ego that we were talking about. That is the most dangerous thing, which can constantly direct us towards the animal world, the animal nature. I was mentioning the other day to some of the friends who were assembled here, it's like an aircraft. We are like a human, the human being is like an aircraft. We have two things. One is the dead weight. You see, the aircraft has a dead weight, which means that dead weight that drags it down all the time. All the time it's ready to drag it down, to drop it. It is the weight, gravity. And then it has the engines which are pulling it up. Now the minute the engines are stopped, immediately the dead weight will pull the aircraft down, and it will not wait and say, "All right, I'll give you 3 minutes." No, immediately it pull it down. So that, you see, the engines is our faith. And it must be always revved up. It must always be operating, always be on. If you are not on our guard, this dead weight, which is the animal nature in man. You know, we have two natures, the animal nature, which we call it self. That is going to pull us down. And so the only thing which will stop it is our faith, which can pull it up. And it's very easy to come